The Tale of Peter Rabbit, based on the original story by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits named Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived in a burrow under the root of a big tree. One day, their mother let them play outside. "Stay close to home," she said, "and don't go near Mr. McGregor's garden." "Why not?" asked Peter. "Because he doesn't like rabbits," Peter's mother answered. "He will try to catch you." Mrs. Rabbit made sure that Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter dressed in their warm clothes. She waved goodbye as they went out to play. When they had gone, she put on her bonnet and shawl and set off to the bakery to buy a loaf of bread. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail were good little rabbits. They went down the lane to pick blackberries. But Peter was naughty. He ran straight to Mr. McGregor's garden. Mr. McGregor had lots of vegetables in his garden, and Peter Rabbit loved vegetables. He began to eat them. First, he tried the lettuce, then he tried the beans, and he finished off with the radishes. But Peter was greedy and ate too much. He began to feel sick. "I must find some parsley to nibble," he said to himself. "That will make me feel better." Peter looked around the garden for the parsley plants. But just then, Mr. McGregor saw him and shouted, "Stop, thief!" He looked very angry. Peter Rabbit was frightened and ran away, but Mr. McGregor ran after him. Peter lost one of his shoes as he ran through the cabbage patch. He lost the other shoe as he jumped over the rows of potatoes. Then he started to run on 4 legs instead of 2 and went much faster. But Peter had forgotten the way back to the gate. He was so frightened that he didn't look where he was going. He got caught in a big net that was hanging on a gooseberry bush. Mr. McGregor had put it there to stop the birds from eating his fruit. The big brass buttons on Peter's blue jacket were tangled in the net. He was trapped. Peter saw Mr. McGregor running toward him, and he began to cry. Some sparrows heard Peter crying and hopped over to see what was wrong. "Keep trying," they chirped. "Don't give up." So Peter Rabbit stopped crying and tried to free himself. Just as Mr. McGregor picked up the sieve to pop over Peter's head, the little rabbit gave a tug and a wriggle and broke free. Away he ran toward the garden shed, leaving his blue jacket in the net. Mr. McGregor followed close behind. When he got inside the shed, Peter hid in a watering can. Mr. McGregor couldn't find him anywhere, but there was water in the watering can, and suddenly Peter felt a sneeze coming on. "Achoo!" went the sneeze. "Achoo!" Mr. McGregor rushed toward the watering can, but just as he reached for it, Peter jumped out and ran toward a small open window. He took a mighty leap and sent some potted plants flying. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor to climb through, so Peter had plenty of time to hide. He saw a wheelbarrow and crouched behind it. When Mr. McGregor came out of the shed, Peter Rabbit was nowhere to be seen. At last, Mr. McGregor grew tired of chasing Peter and went back to his gardening. When Mr. McGregor had gone, Peter climbed up into the wheelbarrow and looked around. He saw Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. Beyond him was the gate. So Peter waited until Mr. McGregor's back was turned. Then he ran along the path toward the garden gate. He squeezed under the gate and was soon safe in the woods outside. "Well done!" chirped the sparrows. Back in the garden, Mr. McGregor hung up Peter's blue jacket and a little pair of shoes to make a scarecrow. Peter ran all the way home. When he got there, he was so tired that he flopped down on the sandy floor and closed his eyes. He still felt sick after all the vegetables he had eaten. And running away from Mr. McGregor had made him feel even worse. Mrs. Rabbit was busy cooking supper when she noticed that Peter's jacket and shoes were missing. She wasn't at all pleased. It was the second pair of shoes Peter had lost in 2 weeks, and the blue jacket was almost new. Then Mrs. Rabbit took a closer look at Peter. "Dear me," she said to herself, "Peter doesn't look very well. Even his whiskers are drooping." So, Mrs. Rabbit went to the cupboard and took out her chamomile tea. She put the kettle on to boil. Peter didn't want any tea, but his mother knew it would make him feel better. Mrs. Rabbit gave Peter a large spoonful of chamomile tea and put him straight to bed. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had fresh bread with milk and blackberries for supper. Mrs. Rabbit let them eat Peter's share too, and they enjoyed every single bite. The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter.